The world is becoming increasingly proficient at telling stories that deny God. As such, we need Thinking Christian to become as natural as breathing. Welcome to the Thinking Christian podcast. I'm Dr. James Spencer. Through calm, thoughtful, theological discussions, Thinking Christian highlights the ways God is working in the world and questions the underlying social, cultural, and political assumptions that hinder Christians from becoming more like Christ. Now, on to today's episode of Thinking Christian. Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of Thinking Christian Podcast. I'm joined here with my co-host Nate Giarantano and our special guest Jeremy Slayden. Jeremy is a former professional baseball player. Then he transitioned out of that, was selling roofs to the government. COVID hit, and he decided to become a researcher and start putting things out on his social media and video and podcasting platform. And one of his videos is what we're going to be talking about really today. It's called The True Origin of Dispensationalism, the Rapture, and Christian Zionism. And so we're excited to welcome Jeremy and get to know him a little bit. So, man, thanks for coming on the podcast. It's great to see you.
Man, happy to be here. And, after our off-camera talk before we went live, man, I realized it's going to be a comfortable place to have a conversation about some topics that not everybody's willing to have. So thank you for that. Yeah,
absolutely, bro. Hey, why don't we start out? Just tell the people. Let's tell the people what you're all about. How'd you come to faith? Kind of what was your journey to even come to Christ, and a little bit of your story.
Yeah, thank you. So I was one of those, I forget what they call it, cradle Christians, where, my family was definitely, they were poor. They needed God. They were in the Word. They were praying a lot because we had nothing. And there's a whole background there, but kind of a history of alcoholism in my family and brokenness. And so my family, when I was a baby, was really seeking God because they had nowhere else to go. There's kind of a beauty in that. And so I was raised in the church and, accepted Christ at a very early age. And sometimes I feel weird about that, right? Because if people say, well, you can't possibly understand Jesus or God or salvation when you're 5 years old, you just can't, right? And there's that little part of me. It's like, well, I do know so much more today than I knew then. And, so I've wrestled with that, but I do know that I've never fully felt alone. I've always had a desire to know my Lord and Savior and follow him. I don't always do a good job of it, but that's the deepest desire of my heart. That's what I want. So, and alongside of that with me, there's always been this deep desire to understand truth. It's like, okay, I didn't ask to come into this world, but here I am. What's the truth about it? And one of the earliest wrestlings with God that I ever had, and this isn't the topic of the show, but I'll give 10,000 foot level, was, I was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, right in there. And they'd have these creation scientists come to our church and talk about, Noah bringing little dinosaurs onto the ark or eggs, and then and the earth being between 6,000 and 7,000 years old or 8,000, whatever the creation scientist was saying. And I wanted to believe that was because it made sense. It fit within what I knew in my brain of a biblical worldview. I knew nothing of Latin or whatever. But then you go to school. And the regular public school where most of the teachers would say they were Christian. This is in the 80s in Tennessee or the early 90s in Tennessee. And yet they're teaching and they're saying that the earth is 4.3 or 4.5 billion years old with a age of the universe that is 13 billion years old. And this is coming from the lips of a professing Christian teacher as well. And I'm supposed to not ask questions about that. And I noticed that I was built a little different than a lot of the other kids at my church who actually didn't ask questions about that. It was almost like there was a mental block where you kind of say what you need to say for the test at school, but you go home and go to church and you believe a completely different thing. That wasn't going to cut it for me. So that was one of the first times I realized, like, I'm a digger. I'm a researcher. I want to know the truth. And here's where I'll land on that. There's a lot of super smart people on all ends of the spectrum when it comes to the age of the earth, creationism, and man, like C.S. Lewis, for instance. Everybody loves C.S. Lewis. I love C.S. Lewis. He's an old earth creationist. He's an old earth guy. So they can really throw people for a loop when they find out just who they respect and where they actually land. And, but that right there, the reason I say that story is I wrestled with God. And every time I was willing to wrestle with God, I would hear this whisper, are you willing to follow the truth all the way? Even if it means either walking away from your faith or walking right back to, I remember I would have that question. Like, there was one time I was really doubting, and I think it was the enemy who was in my ear saying, you know that you're going to cling to this Christianity no matter what. because you're soft, you're weak.
Mm,
Go study, go read Richard Dawkins, go read the books against your faith, go figure it out. And are you
sure.
willing to walk away from your faith? And I remember answering that question. This is going to sound really weird, but I remember saying, yes, if the truth is so apparent that I would actually walk away. But what happened was I saw these massive gaps in
Yeah.
atheistic thinking, in New Age thinking, the questions that they leave unanswered on purpose, and the
Yeah.
bias. I was shocked because I thought, well, they're going to be pretty solid out there in the science world. And I was studying geology at Georgia Tech at the time. So like I had a lot of people around me telling me the opposite of a Christian worldview. But what happened is every time that happened, I walked away with a stronger faith because God revealed himself even more. And there were mysteries that were uncovered. One of my favorite verses, I'm going to get it wrong. So how could it be my favorite verse is, um, it is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but it's the glory of kings to seek the matter out, right? To
Sure.
search a matter out. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying I'm a king, but I am saying like I want to understand some of the deeper things of God, and it's just
Yeah.
how God made me. And so I'm incredibly affected when I see a large segment of society in a country or around the world that I feel are being deceived by a deception but and in 2020 I'd had enough. I saw it down there in Atlanta with government and the way things were going, and just some little US based deceptions. We can get into those later, but then
Yeah.
COVID hit, and I saw just blindness by people on all sides in the Christian world and in the secular world, and willingness to follow a narrative because it means their comfort. If I
Mm,
just don't say anything, that's enough for me, as long as like I can watch my Netflix and my family's not hurt, right?
yeah. Yeah.
But ultimately, I saw that where I saw where it was going. Where is that logically leading us, and who's leading us? Are the people leading us have our best interest as the common people and as Christians? Do they have our best interest at heart? And almost every time I'd have to say no, right? So if we
Yeah.
continue to say, I'm going to trade in I'm going to hold my comfort at the expense of truth, this is going to come to a really dark place, really dark. So I felt God call me to leave my job and to begin to not only seek truth, but speak it. And man, it has been a journey. And as we'll get into some of these topics, I'm sure it's even put me at odds with many in the Christian world that rooted me on at first, but then I uncovered something that I could verify. I can't unsee it. But people, again, it's like, if you're shaking up their worldview, not their Christian faith at all, but their worldview, the way that they frame their world. It's kind of like in the Matrix. He said they will fight to protect it. They'll fight,
Yeah.
even though they're on your team, they'll fight you because they don't want that discomfort of the rug being pulled under from something they've maybe held dear for a long time. So that's kind of where I'm at today. I'm trying to build the platform for everybody watching. If you'll follow me on Instagram, Rumble, and Substack, J Slay USA, those are three great places where I kind of lead. That's my leading edges of my content is there. And any kind of support through shares, through likes, because I'm trying to build the platform enough I can monetize this and support my family.
Yeah. Well, man, I think a few things you say there really resonate with me. I mean, I was definitely a contrarian. I wasn't going to believe anything just because somebody told me.
Yeah.
Actually, the guy who was discipling me before I went to do my first theological degree, he said, "You're too hard headed for anybody to teach you this stuff. You're just going to have to go learn it on your own." And so that's how I
Best
ended up
way.
that's how I ended up getting into theological education. But I think the other thing, and probably more importantly, as we sort of frame out what we're going to talk about here in a bit, is, the seeming inability to disagree without being offended. I
Right.
mean, I think you mentioned in our sort of our pre-interview, concerns about free speech.
Yeah.
And I think one of the ways that we're really losing free speech for ourselves, forget the government taking it away from us, right? One of the ways we're losing free speech for ourselves is that we're continually on the defensive against things that we just don't want to hear. And so I think there's real observations that we can make about the world. There's real understandings we can come to, and there are positions that we're probably not going to agree with at all.
Yeah.
Right. But that aren't invalid positions. And we just need to learn to let other people speak, us take that in. And if we end up agreeing, great. If we end up disagreeing, great. But we just get into this moment where we try to demonize each other or keep each other at arm's length.
Yeah.
And bro, like that to me is not the church. Like the church
Agreed.
is that it's sort of that really uncomfortable space where we're rubbing shoulders with people that God has brought us next to that we might not otherwise have gravitated toward.
Yes.
and
Yeah.
and so we gotta sort of embrace each other and just figure this out together. So I appreciate you being on the podcast. And I think this podcast is always about thinking Christian, and so we're just going to try to think Christian about these topics we're going to discuss today. And I think particularly your Rumble video, your Rumble movie, I suppose we'd call it.
Yeah, a little short. It's 30 minutes long, maybe a
Yeah.
little less than that. So it's a quick watch, but it gives a strong overview of a lot of research I've done onto some eschatology.
Yeah. And so the title of it is The True Origin of Dispensationalism, the Rapture, and Christian Zionism. We'll have the link in the show notes so folks can link out to it and see it if they want to see it. You also have a Substack article, and remind me of the title of that one, because it wasn't you. So you think the rapture?
Yeah,
it was the
dubious origins of America's most popular end times view. It's the second to the last thing that I've posted. So if you follow me on Substack, you'll see it as a very recent article. It's my first article that's really made a splash in terms of what I've done there.
Nice.
But it also, what it does there is you can go deeper with the research I've done. I provide lots of research links there, and I made sure to put stuff that also disagreed with my points, because I make a pretty strong statement throughout my article saying premillennial dispensationalism wasn't really a fully formed view until around the mid 1820s to 1830s, and it still had a long way to go. But that's the time people like Edward Irving, the Scottish minister, or John Nelson Darby began to put it out. It was formed. So I'm making that claim, but there's also YouTube videos that are called
For some of us, personal finances aren't just personal. They include loved ones, neighbors, the communities we call home, and the causes we hold in our hearts. At Thrivent, planning your finances is bigger than just money. We help you put your plans into motion and faith into action so you can do more for the ones in your heart. Because sometimes all you need to make a difference is someone to help you make it happen. Thrivent, where money means more. Connect with us at thrivent.com.
Dispensationalism before Darby that talks about a little sect here or there. And I want people to see, like, I'm not being biased and I'm not doing this and saying I'm not going to look at that. I just think that where those opposing videos land or research lands is not nearly as strong as the positions I'm holding.
Fair enough. Yeah. I mean, I think there's always little minority reports around. It's very difficult when you start getting back into the history of interpretation of things. You can almost always find somewhere that this view was popping up and bubbling up somewhere.
Yeah, there's kind of a lot of people in the world, so
right, exactly. The critical mass of a movement is very different than just having a little pop here and there. So we'll also link to that Substack article, but talk a little bit about why you got into that. What's your passion there? Why is this something you wanted to address in the first place?
Well, it actually came to me inadvertently without me trying to seek it out. I through Jay Slay USA on my show, because I'm a Christian, because I'm trying to look at things through a biblical worldview, even though I also bring in people that don't believe on my show. I have a lot of missionaries, Christian authors, and ministers. Also seminary professionals. The head of one of my recent interviews was with I forget what you call the head of a theological school, but it was Ben Witherington III. He's the head of the doctoral program at Asbury University.
Yep.
And he affirmed, I'm not going to say everything in my article, but pretty much everything in my article. He was just like, you're right. He's like, the majority of the Christian mainstream church does not see this because they're refusing to see it.
Right.
But what happened was, as I had these people on the show, because I saw where the world's going, this globalization, I was watching COVID closely. I was watching the WHO and how they're wanting to have us do these treaties, basically, that say that we can write off our Constitution with a flick of a president's pen and hand that over to the WHO with the next pandemic. I mean, that sounds kind of revelatory, kind of biblical, right? Especially when it has to do with bodies and marking your body potentially. There's right. So I'm asking these ministers, where do you think we're at in terms of end times, or what do you believe? And I would notice on the show, they would give me these really soft general answers. And I was like, why didn't they really answer the question? So we'd get, now this is, I'd say 75, 80% of the time. And I talk about this in the article. after the show, I'd say, hey, like, I noticed you really didn't answer that question. Just between you and I, they say, well, don't put this out. Or are you not recording? And I'd be like, no, I'm not recording. And they'd say, I used to hold to the whole Left Behind, Kirk Cameron, premillennial dispensationalism eschatology. But as I learned more things, I'm not really there anymore. And I said, well, what was the things? And many times they'd say, well, it's not very old. It's a newer theology within the Christian church, and specifically the American evangelical church. Doesn't mean it's wrong necessarily, but it puts you in a weird, it's embarrassing. And they kept saying two names, John Nelson Darby and Cyrus Schofield. John Nelson Darby being the first guy. He was the first true salesman who came to America and sold some of the seminaries, Moody being one of them, on the eschatology. And it found its way into the Schofield Reference Bible, where he even took it further. And then it really got into the seminaries, Chicago, Dallas, many others, Biola. I mean, it spread like wildfire. And at that point, to get a Schofield Reference Bible was a big deal. That was the thing for a while. So I said, I gotta know on this. So I started to do my own research, and I was like, wow, they're correct. This was not a widely held view at all. It was not a well-formed view, fully formed view at all until about 1830, give or take about 5 years. And even and it's like, well, who were these men? Who was Darby? Where did he get his ideas from? And there was a group of conferences going on in England at the time. And I found this Jesuit priest named Manuel Lacunza, who wrote a book called The Coming of Messiah in Glory and Majesty, and he faked who he was. He said on the title of the book that he wrote, it said that he was the converted Rabbi Juan Yosefat ben Ezra. So he pretended to be a Jew, even though he was not, right? And I read this book. I mean, it's a hard read. This guy's, I mean, the Jesuits are some of the most intelligent. I'm giving him kudos. He is intelligent. But if you read the Jesuit Oath of Induction, it's called the Extreme Oath of Induction, and these are like the deepest, these are the 33rd degree Freemasons of the Jesuits, all right? It says in their Oath of Induction, you have ultimate, your allegiance at the end of the day is to the Vatican and the Pope, period. And what you will do is you will go to other countries. You will pretend to be a Protestant. You will pretend to be a Jew when you need to be a Jew. You will ingratiate yourself to the bankers, to the doctors, to all the attorneys. It's incredibly detailed, this oath they take. And it basically says, even when you need to fight against the Vatican in order to ultimately bring about an end that serves the Vatican, do that, because you're going to fake people out. And then I was like, well, that's the oath they took. Then he writes a book that's all about Christian Zionism and reestablishing a nation state for Israel, and the old covenant coming back in the end times. He wrote all this down in the book, and this idea of three comings of Christ: the original coming of Christ, where he died on a cross and rose again and ascended. Then the rapture, then another second coming. And it kind of reads a lot like what we believe today. If you go to a eschatology, a premillennial dispensational church, right? Yeah. So I saw all that for what it was, and we can dig into details later. And then there were these other little markers. For some crazy reason, James, Kirk Cameron has been attending my little church here in Franklin, Tennessee.
No kidding. Okay.
He sometimes speaks. He's become friends with my pastor. And I went on a trip with my pastor recently to Montana, kind of a getaway. And I said to my pastor, and I'm not giving my pastor's name because he and I think, disagree on some of these things. Yeah. But I said, where does Kirk land? Is he still in the rapture camp? He's like, no, he doesn't believe in that anymore. And right now you can find articles in Forbes and others where they've interviewed Kirk. He tries to play nice with it because, his brand is going to be still to go. And I say that in a nice way. Sure. He doesn't want to get canceled from the church world, and you can quickly if you don't hold the line right on some of these things. So he's soft-spoken about it, but no, he has what he would call, I think, is a hopeful and positive view, in the sense that we're the bride of Christ. We are going to win this war. Yes, we're seeing major pushback right now, but we are going to become closer and closer and closer. It's the golden age of the church. And when we're ready, then Christ will return to receive a bride that's worthy of him, in that sense. Now, if Kirk watches this, if I got a couple things wrong, brother, I'm sorry. But generally speaking, that was a big moment for me, was hearing, well, even Kirk Cameron the guy that was whatever his name was in the books, because I devoured those books as a kid.
The Left Behind series.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Left Behind series. Well, I'm thinking his name was Buck, right? That was the role he played of this journalist or whatever who was involved when the rapture happened. But yeah, Buck no longer believes in the rapture.
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, and I think every theological system I've ever run across, you always end up, one of my seminary professors told me, every system makes you do a dance when you're reading the biblical text. And he said, so what you're trying to do is find the system that makes you dance the least. Mm-hmm. But a couple of places where I see dispensationalism making you dance are some of these passages like 2 Peter 3, where Peter talks about our holy and godly living, hastening the day of God, hastening the coming of the Lord. And there was a Second Temple Jewish understanding that the lives of the Jewish people, the way that they repented, their sort of cleaving over to the Lord, that would ultimately bring about the coming of the Messiah. And so you see this in the New Testament, actually in Peter's sermon in Acts, he kind of references this, but then specifically in 2 Peter 3. And so there is a sense in which the way we live sort of draws forward God's coming. Now, do we know, if I do 6 good works, is that going to take 6 days off God's coming or something like that? We have no idea what that looks like, but we know that it does do something.
No doubt. And the pushback on this to go against maybe what I said that Kirk Cameron believed, I feel guilty now because that may not have been exactly
it. No, don't sweat it. Yeah, we get it. We get it.
But, in terms of suffering and persevering for the cross, that doesn't sound like if it's going to get worse and worse and it's our job to still push forward with the gospel, that's a very holy thing. That and I think in God's eyes, that is awesome. So there's kind of two views of this. Post-millennialists would say, well, it's going to get better and better because the church, greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. We're going to win this thing. That's that Doug Wilson kind of channel there. And there's a lot of hope in that. I mean, if that's what I would want to tell a young athlete is like, hey, you may be down in the count right now. You may be losing the game, but ultimately you fight. You're going to win. You're the leader of your team. He's got the secret sauce. You're going to win this game. That makes me want to go out and fight, kind of do the William Wallace thing. The other way is a lot harder road. It's our holiness through persecution that is going to hasten the return of Christ. It's harder, and it's not necessarily a recipe to go out and want to win games because it's like, you're probably going to, until the last inning that has nothing to do with you're not going to win until Christ comes and he does it, I know I feel guilty when I feel like I'm not saying it right, but I think speaking, you probably get where I'm coming from.
I do. I mean, so here's the picture I usually use with people. It's Rocky. Right. In the first Rocky movie, if you remember the first Rocky movie.
Oh, totally.
Rocky, he visits the stadium, he comes back and he's talked to Adrian and he says, nobody's ever gone the distance with Apollo. I'm just going to go the distance with Apollo. Yeah. And in that moment, he redefined success.
Yes.
And so by the end of the movie, Rocky, when he's still standing at the end of that match, you feel the victory. It doesn't matter that he loses the match. You feel the victory. And I think we have something similar to that, although obviously much greater in Christianity, right? Because what Christ did was he walked to the cross to win. Like he is the slain lamb who wins. That victory comes post this life, right? I don't think we usher in utopia, right? But I do think that our endurance and staying faithful to the end is the victory. That's how we win. And so that now, does that mean that the win only comes when Christ comes back? Not exactly. Right. But even if we read through some of the pieces of Revelation, one of the most powerful scenes in that book, I think, is when the martyrs are crying out from under the altar and they're saying, well, how long, O Lord, until we're avenged? Like, when is this going to happen? And so I think even the sort of picture in heaven is that this endurance is a requirement of the victory. We have to do it. Yeah. Now there are certainly other views, but that's just how I've always pictured it. It's this idea that, our responsibility is not to make the world better necessarily. our responsibility is to be faithful in a world that may not get better, but that is the march to victory. Now, there's definitely other ways to view it, but that's kind of how I've always conceptualized it.
I love that framing because I love the Rocky movies, and I've not wanted, just because I've walked away from some of the elements of premillennial dispensationalism, I'm not one to poo-poo it, and I think the way you just put it with Rocky, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's that, we think about Jesus as the conquering lamb, which he's often pictured as the conquering lamb in Revelation. I think we're supposed to see the paradox in that picture, right? Mm-hmm. The conquering lamb. Lambs don't conquer.
Yeah, no,
right.
Not normally, right?
Right. And so there's a redefinition of success, there's a redefinition of victory. And that victory comes through that endurance, being faithful to the end, even unto death, which is what Christ demonstrates on the cross. But the reality is he's the only person who's ever lived a life that resulted in resurrection and glorification.
Right.
I mean, that's why we tie ourselves to him, because what he did worked. Right. In part, that's what happened. So, that's how I think, we can that's how I conceptualized it. But yeah, I agree with you. I think a couple things. Number one, what you're saying about this sort of being let's say a taboo to come out against these type of eschatological positions in the church is a really strange phenomenon. And I think in part, as we talked again before the interview, I think in part it is due, or it's at least tied up with, a particular political stance with regard to nation of Israel, with obviously with rapture. But I think that sort of Israel piece has become a strange one for me. Yeah. Talk a little bit about your thoughts on that and what you found in your research as you were looking at this.
Yeah, man, this is a deep, wide topic. So I don't even know. Honestly, I do not know where to start. And, NRB, for all the good that it does, National Religious Broadcasters Conference, I was in this area discouraged because it helped. It really made me understand how difficult it's going to be to overturn some of these ideas that I think for our country, at least, are it's life or death. And I mean that with all importance. So people would say, well, no, we got to support Israel, because if not, there's going to be Islamic caliphate. I asked basic questions to people at NRB. I kind of took a poll because I knew I'm not going to penetrate the ideology here. It's just, it would be impossible, but I want to know what they know. Right. Sure. So this is modern concerns. Let me pull up my questions real quick, and I'll kind of tell you the general, and I video the people that would let me video them. I videoed. Let's see. Hold on one second here. Questions. All right. So I don't know where I'll go ahead and say it. The first question I asked was, do you believe the mainstream narrative of 9/11? We have not talked about this, guys. Most people did not know what to say to that. Some people said yes, some people said no, but I said, well, who did it if it wasn't simply the Taliban and Osama bin Laden? And they had no answers for me.
Or they just didn't want to talk about it, right? They just didn't want to go there.
Yeah, it's like, where's this question coming from? But but once you have an understanding of what really happened there, which I'm not going to talk about unless you ask, once you have that understanding, it makes what happened on October 7th a lot more, you get it. And you realize there's sophisticated evil in the world utilizing barbaric evil, and everybody's fooled because it's easy to think in terms of barbaric evil and nice, innocent, God's chosen people that are getting slaughtered. And I'm not taking away from the evil that day. It was demonic. But what's even more demonic is when you have a Mossad, which is their CIA, and the high level defense force that they have, allowing it to happen on purpose. Mm-hmm. And guys like Raphael Hayan, who were they were in charge of intercepting Hamas transmissions over the radio and otherwise, and they were called down a week in advance saying, stop doing what you're doing. Stop sending your stuff up the chain. And I've got videos of him crying, saying they called me off, and then they called me right back on a week later, said, we need you again. Mm-hmm. And it's like, why would that happen? And then when you know Egypt had intercepted these transmissions, and they were telling the Israeli government 10 days in advance, watch out, this is coming. And they were basically told to shut up, like they weren't paid attention to. And then you see on October 8th, Netanyahu and the head of the defense forces and others are saying, this is our 9/11. This is our 9/11. I looked at that and immediately knew yeah, it's your 9/11 on multiple levels. And number two, I knew because I understood the state of the church, almost the entire church is going to buy this, and we're going to dump praise money and support on your nation because we feel so afraid of Islamic extremism on the one hand, but also it's God's chosen people. All right. So we're just going to support, right? We're support. Again, I want to make a disclaimer here. I sent money to a family that came to my church to talk about the devastation that happened that day, and they're struggling, so I want to help innocent people on both sides. That being said, next question I asked, how many Palestinians have died in the current war in Gaza? Out of probably the 30 people I asked, one person knew, and they said it's around 30,000, right? And I said, yeah. Everybody else is like 2,000 maybe, because they're thinking, well, it's been about 2,000 Israelis, if they even knew that. So most of them did not know. Next question, how many Israelis have died in the current war in Gaza? Again, most people didn't know, but they thought, well, 1,200 that day, maybe 3,000 to 5,000. It's around, I don't even want to say, but it's in the very low thousands, maybe maybe 3,000. Do you know the name of Israel's artificial intelligence bombing technology? This is this is not Jeremy saying it. You can find this all over the internet where they're talking about it and glowing the sophistication of this AI artificial bombing that's now taken the lives of 30,000 Palestinians. So, most of these are not Hamas. Most of these are Palestinian citizens who were displaced their families back in 48. It's just what it is. Well, they named that. No one knew this answer, but it's readily available. It's called the gospel. That's what they have named that bombing technology. Then I wrote, do you know the combined? Now you got to think NRB is loaded with stars of David, or as I like to say, stars of Remphan. They're loaded with those Israeli stars. And you see that far more than you actually see symbolism wise of the cross. But you got Donald Trump showing up there, and we think, okay, Christians think they've got the market cornered on support for Israel. Like, we support God's chosen people. The left does. And Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and all those people, they fall all over themselves trying to support Israel. Most Christians don't know that. But the question I asked was, do you know the combined Jewish and Israeli political lobbies? So all of them, AIPAC, ADL, and others, who did they give more money to in 2016 and in 2020? Was it the Democrats or the Republicans? Was it Trump or was it Biden? And I said, because they gave 4 times more money to one or the other. Either they didn't know, or they said Trump, because they're like, well, Trump's the one, we support Israel. We're Christian. We voted for Trump. Of course they gave money to Trump. No. So we're dumping money over there. They're using, and we're sending our tax dollars as well. We've sent more money to Israel than any other nation since 1948. It's closing in on $300 billion at this point. We're dropping white phosphorus bombs, which are burning down to the bones of these people, and we're calling it the gospel. Because we're giving them the money to do it. They could not do this on their own. And I see all the support, and I'm kind of heartbroken over it, but I know I will be a pariah if I openly speak about this. That's why I decided to just ask the questions at NRB. Yeah. But yeah, 4 times the amount went to Joe Biden. So all this talk that the conservative right does about supporting Israel and all this stuff, they're turning around and giving money right back to their, ideological enemies in America. It's just what's happening. And then last, how important is the Talmud to modern Jewish belief? I think 1 person out of the 30 even knew what the Talmud was.
Yeah. I can't imagine it's that important, is it?
It's well, let me read.
Yeah.
Real quickly. It's very important. Give me 1 second here, because there's something, there's a quote I want to give. That's why I'm taking a moment to pull it up.
They still take it seriously. That's crazy.
It's the thing is, it's the religion of the rabbis. All right.
Yeah.
So if it's the religion of the rabbis, and it's purposely kept hidden from Christians. Now we can go find it, but how many Christians actually sit and do research? Like, not many. We just believe what our pastors typically tell us, say, well, they're a man of God. We're not going to distrust them on this issue. And I think most pastors don't know what I'm about to say. So this is from the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia in 1943 and in the iterations since. The Jewish religion as it is today traces its descent without break through all the centuries from the Pharisees. Their leading ideas and methods found expression in a literature of enormous extent, of which a very great deal is still in existence. Our Talmud is the largest and most important single piece of our literature. The study of it is essential for any real understanding of modern day Phariseeism. They called it Phariseeism. And then the Jewish Encyclopedia also says, this is the last quote I'll read: with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, the Sadducees disappeared altogether, leaving the regulation of all Jewish affairs in the hands of the Pharisees. Henceforth, Jewish life was regulated by the Pharisees. The whole history of Judaism was reconstructed from the Pharisaic point of view, and a new aspect was given to the Sanhedrin of the past. A new chain of tradition supplanted the older priestly tradition. Phariseeism has shaped the character of Judaism and life and thought of the Jew for all of the future. So I could go on with other things, but that is, most Christians don't know that. The rabbis, this is not a simple commentary. It's not like, well, occasionally I'll break open Matthew Henry's commentary. No, this is what it's in every single synagogue, and it is the lens through which they view the Torah. And oh, by the way, a lot of modern day rabbis, they don't believe in the God of the Old Testament any longer. They respect it as nice children's stories for morality, but they're very much secularist, and they can still be rabbis. I mean, you may not know this. This is a side note, but I think as people explore this issue, it matters. The owner of Pornhub is a Jewish rabbi. So you don't have. It's not like when you say you're Christian. If you say you're Christian, by default, you cannot be an atheist.
Sure.
That is not true in Judaism. It can be an ethnicity, it can be a culture, it can be a religion. So it's a different thing, and Christians got to wrap our heads around this, because I believe that we are inadvertently shooting ourselves in the foot from an eschatological perspective, as well as financial, political, and otherwise, not understanding what's really going on here. I think we've been hoodwinked in a big way.
It's really interesting. I mean, I haven't studied this from the angles that you have. So, I mean, I'm familiar with the Talmud. I understand what it functioned as early on in early Judaism, and I knew that it kind of continued on to contemporary, but those are some interesting passages to think through. I think the other side of this, where I've often thought through this, is it's just not clear to me. Here's what I'll say. Our eschatological system, particularly our dispensational eschatological system, lends itself to the Jews having a continuing special relationship with God, that they are still God's chosen people. But when I read something like a Romans 9 through 11, or, I look at sort of the way that the church is described in 1 Peter 2, for instance, where these titles that were ascribed to the former nation of Israel are now ascribed to the church. It's difficult not to just sit back and say, I think that the church age is the age in which the Jews and the Gentiles are now going to be united in Christ, and that Israel has really become just another nation. There's a really fantastic portion of 1 Peter where 1 Peter talks about Christians, the church, Christians, all these different things. And then he talks about not being reviled in front of the Gentiles. Yes. And so now, instead of, Jews, Gentiles, what he's saying is Christians, Gentiles.
Yes.
Which is sort of this fascinating thing where it's like, wow, what's going on there? And so I think there's the direct evidence that, the Jews right now, it's not that they're excluded from faith in Christ. Right. Jewish people, Gentile people, all of us could be united in Christ.
First to the Jew, then to the Gentile.
Then to the Gentile. Right. And I think more Jews can still come in. But the reality is the secular Israelite nation is a secular nation.
Very much so.
And it's not, this sort of sacred entity anymore. It is just filled with people who happen to have a genealogical or ethnic lineage, some sort of a connection, in other words, to this broader tradition. But if we don't view it like that, it becomes very easy to make it a fetish.
Yeah, and
very simple to do.
To that point about ethnicity, at this point in history, almost all of us have some element of of Jewish DNA, at least a little, right? So if that were the case, at what is it, 10%? Is it 40? Is it 60? Right. Like when do you get to be God's chosen people then, because it's like it's muddy, you know, and that's true of all races, right?
Right.
Let me read, and to wrap this back to what we opened with. We were talking about an article, and I mentioned the Jesuit priest Manuel Lacunza and just how sophisticated and smart they were. You brought up Romans. This is from the King James, because that's what they used. Now, what he did was this coming of Messiah in glory and majesty, where he pretended to be the converted Jewish rabbi. It functioned on two levels, this book. On the one hand, it was a book giving his thoughts. On the other hand, it was truly a Bible commentary. So he changed some words. Well, he changed one word of the Bible, and it's something that would mostly go unnoticed. But this is, so he changed the word, and then he did a commentary on it. All right.
For some of us, personal finances aren't just personal. They include loved ones, neighbors, the communities we call home, and the causes we hold in our hearts. At Thrivent, planning your finances is bigger than just money. We help you put your plans into motion and faith into action so you can do more for the ones in your heart. Because sometimes all you need to make a difference is someone to help you make it happen. Thrivent, where money means more. Connect with us at Thrivent.com.
This is Romans 11:25 and 11:26. And again, King James, because that's what he was using. Yep. For I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery. Lest ye should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. Now, this is where it gets important. And so all Israel shall be saved. As it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. So the commentaries, the biblical commentaries prior to this writing, Lacunza's writing, agreed that not all of genetic descendants of Israel are going to be a part of faithful Israel. Okay. Yeah. Romans 11:26, according to Lacunza, uses the word so. He changed the word. He made it an adverb of manner, or how something would be accomplished. Only faithful Israel would be saved by conversion. I'm sorry, I got that backwards. Forgive me. That was what the word so is the original. All right. That's not Lacunza's. I got that all backwards. That's the original King James, is an adverb of manner. And so all Israel shall be saved by a conversion to faith in Christ. So all these different commentaries, Matthew Henry and many others, all said this is what that means. Now, Lacunza changed it. Here's what he wrote. When the fullness hath entered in, or the time of the nations are concluded, then all Israel shall be saved. That is, Israel shall be saved a little while before the end of the world, after the death of their false Messiah. So he changed the word so, an adverb of manner, to the word then, an adverb of time. And he even in his commentary provided specifics of this time period. And he believed that it was a singular event in which all ethnic Jews would be converted. So these guys, Irving, Darby, and others, just took that and ran with it, because it wasn't about an individual heart change with the Jews. It was this future time in history where the Jews were going to be converted. And but it's incredibly sophisticated. And you almost wonder, like, did he really do that on purpose, knowing? But then you find out, no, these guys, Ribera was a Jesuit, Lacunza was a Jesuit, and another. They were all writing books to do one thing. The Protestant reformers of the day were looking at the Catholic Church, the Pope, and the Vatican, saying the Pope is the Antichrist and the Vatican is the beast system. That's what they were saying. And they were gaining followers in droves, pulling away from the political power of the Catholic Church. The priest was commissioning these writings, saying we have to infect their reformed eschatology, because you're killing us over there, reformers. And they could not penetrate. But when Lacunza pretended to be a Jewish rabbi that had converted, that pulled at the heartstrings of Edward Irving, and man, off to the races. That's how this thing got started.
Well, this is definitely one of the passages, like in Romans 9-11, where I'd say dispensationalists overread. The reality is, when you're looking at it, what is all Israel? There's a way to read these passages, just those passages you just read, and to understand the mixed multitude of Jews and Gentiles. Now that the full number of Gentiles has come in, now that's all Israel. In other words, all Israel doesn't have to be the Jews. It can be this mixed multitude of Jews and Gentiles who are now united in Jesus Christ. They're united in Messiah.
Well, all you've got to do to prove your point outright is jump back a few verses. I didn't read these. So
right.
Two quick ones. It said Romans 9:6 and 9:8. not as though the word of God hath taken no effect, for they are not all Israel, which are of Israel.
Which are of Israel. Right.
And then Romans 9:8 really drives it home. They, which are children of the flesh, these are not the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted for the seed.
Yeah.
So it's,
and I mean, that children of the promise, you're playing with now Galatians, where, Paul contrasts Hagar and Ishmael with Sarah and Isaac. You're playing with Romans 4, where he talks about, Abraham in, you're not ancestors of Abraham, sons of Abraham, not sons of Abraham in the flesh. They're sons of Abraham in faith. Like, you've got this whole interpretive trajectory, and then to get here and to use this as sort of the basis for your system is a really difficult thing to do. I've seen the arguments of this too, but I find it fascinating, that these are the type of passages that we are choosing to lean an entire eschatological system on. And, if you read them,
you have to ignore many others, or at least
really
make them carry no weight.
That's right. And I mean, with this, what you kind of sit back and say, it's like, everybody, we want to be doing evangelism. We want to be doing a discipleship. We want to be welcoming everybody into the church. But there is not this, special apple of the eye place that a specific ethnic group continues, if we can even say ethnic, to your point earlier, right? I don't even know how to refer to them, but a group who identifies themselves as God's chosen people now, simply are making that assertion, right? God's chosen people are always found in Christ. And so it's just a very interesting way that I think we've lost our way on these issues. And part of it is that it's much more difficult to understand the distinctions between these groups than it is to recognize them and fold them all together. It's a simpler way of understanding it in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. Like, we don't have to distinguish between distinguishing between church and Israel is much easier than understanding that now Israel is sort of manifest in the people of God brought together.
Yes.
It's just a very difficult thing to understand. So I think this does work itself out in a lot of ways. Obviously, this forms the basis for a lot of the support that Christians give to the modern state of Israel.
Yes.
Right. And I think it cuts Israel an awful lot of slack. Now, however we land on the political side of this, what Israel's response to Gaza was and all that kind of other stuff, I do think there is a leaning toward giving Israel the benefit of the doubt, almost always.
Oh, yeah. Well, it is happening. And if the numbers were reversed and it was 30,000 Israelis killed and 2,000 or 2,500 Gazans, you better believe you'd know about it. But this disproportionate death, most Christians have no idea. This has happened in the same way since 1948. Every time there's an attack on one side or the other, way more Palestinians die than Israelis. One other thing I've noticed, and I want to get your thoughts on this, that I want to be fair, because at NRB or with pastors that are total Christian Zionists, I've felt very often that there's less, because of this eschatology, that the fullness of the Gentiles have come in, then all Israel shall be saved, or much of it. Yeah. There's kind of this lackadaisical approach to actually trying to evangelize Jewish people. I could be wrong on that, but I've just seen very much it's more like, we got to support God's chosen. We got to support God's chosen people. This desperation, even from pastors like John Hagee and some others. And it's like, shouldn't we be desperately trying to win them to Christ and showing them how Jesus fulfilled the promises of the Old Testament? And I want to be fair. There are groups that do that I think try or do that. But there's many times just this kind of muddy, easy, we just got to support them because Jesus will call in the people when it's time.
I see that. I saw that a lot when I worked for dispensational schools in the past and stuff like that. You'd have this unqualified support for the Jewish people and particularly for the state of Israel. I also saw the other side, which was the zeal to convert the Jews. And so I think the real point of confusion lies sort of a step backward, I would say.
Okay.
I think it lies in our unwillingness to pick up the weapons of the Spirit and our contentment to work with the weapons of the world. And so if
Okay.
I read something like Ephesians 6, where we read, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the powers and the principalities and the authorities in the heavenly places. And then we have this list of the entire army or armor of God. That is our armor. That's what we battle with. That's what we're fighting. These are spiritual battles. They're not physical battles. They may involve the physical, they may involve the temporal, but ultimately what we're doing is we're fighting a spiritual war. And so we fight a spiritual war with the actual gospel, not the AI enabled gospel that is targeting people. But we win this war by pulling people under Christ's authority through conversion into Christianity. But I think that there's a confusion about this and a contentment to just use the political machinery of the world and almost an enamorment with that power, and to be able to see the effect of a political lobbying effort to say, let's support Israel, let's give them money, let's do all these things.
Okay. Yeah.
And to sort of leave aside this spiritual darkness that Israel continues. I mean, I remember the first time I went to Israel and saw people at the Wailing Wall. It was one of the more disturbing things I have ever seen in my life.
Mm-hmm.
People standing at the Wailing Wall, crying out to a wall.
Yeah.
Putting prayers in a wall.
Don't you think is it a idolatry in a sense, in the old sense?
I think it is. Yeah. I mean, I think it is. I would say, and not idolatry in sort of like the, where we might construct some sort of a weird system of like, they're forming a new God. I think what they've got is they're trying to worship a God they don't know. Because they've rejected Christ, they now no longer know who God is. They're outside of the new covenant and thus lacking revelation of who God is. And so as they're standing at this wall, they're crying out for a God who's moved past them.
Yeah.
And it's just a really sad and disturbing thing. But you're right. There are groups who address that. We don't want to leave those out. But I do think some of the more popular calls to let's support Israel financially, let's get on board, let's vote for the politicians who are going to support Israel, all those kind of things that to me is sort of that contentment with the weapons of the world.
Yeah.
It's that idea that we can affect this temporally and then wait and see what happens spiritually.
Yes.
And I just don't think and I see that confusion a lot, that sort of merger of Christianity and politics.
Yes.
It's not that we shouldn't be participating. It's that we also have our own power over here that's really, really great. And we should be exercising it. But we too often just sort of say, well, we have this, but the political machinery seems really, potent.
No doubt. And there's a third group here that we really need to address. It's not just you've got Christians and then you've got, these religious Jews going to the Wailing Wall. Yeah. Joe Biden has gone to the Wailing Wall. Barack Obama has gone to the Wailing Wall. Donald Trump goes to the Wailing Wall. They all go to the Wailing Wall and they either wail or pray or both. So many of these are secular people, most of it being that they don't care about any of this stuff that we're actually talking about, but all day long, they will take your prayers, your love, your support, your money, under the guise of, well, we're Israel, we're God's chosen people. Keep sending it, churches, keep helping, and they actually aren't even in the spectrum of these two groups that we're talking about. And they are a very large, this would be the Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi has said with feeling, conviction, if the United States crumbles to the ground, the one thing that will remain is our support of Israel. And so it's just there's really three groups here, man. There's the Christians that I think are hoodwinked in many ways. Then you've got these religious Jews that it's like you said, it's sad. There's kind of a darkness around it and wailing. They're crying out to God they no longer know. Then you've got a third group that's just enjoying the benefits of all of it.
Yeah. Well, bro, we've covered a ton of ground. I kind of hate to stop talking, but
let's do a part two, man. Let's talk about
we'll
solution.
do a part two. We'll have you back on because I think at the end of the day, here's sort of where I think we can land this is just to say, and this is something I think we advocate for on the podcast is let's just get back into the biblical text. Let's really deeply try to understand it. Let's understand the histories that we're dealing with. let's think well about these issues. And let's not worry about whose feathers we're going to ruffle, right? Let's just think well about the only person we have to please is God. And so let's not get too enamored with our own thoughts. Let's make sure we're letting the Bible lead. Let's make sure we're letting theology lead. And let's be transformed in our thinking as opposed to stuck in it. Yes. And so I appreciate having you on, bro. And let's definitely do a part 2. I'd love to sort of finish this out with some ways that we could kind of solve this and rethink different things. Yeah, thanks for being on. Really appreciate having you.
I loved it. Great conversation. I appreciate both you guys. Thank you.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Thinking Christian. Just want to take a second to thank the team at Life Audio for their partnership with us on the Thinking Christian podcast. If you go to lifeaudio.com, you'll find dozens of other faith-centered podcasts in their network. They've got shows about prayer, Bible study, parenting, and more.
Looking for inspiration and uplifting stories of faith? Welcome to the Jesus Calling Stories of Faith podcast, now available on Life Audio. Join us each week for heartfelt conversations and personal stories from people from all walks of life that will inspire you and lift your spirit. Whether you're seeking comfort, motivation, or just a moment of peace, the Jesus Calling Stories of Faith podcast offers a beautiful reminder of faith and hope. Listen to the Jesus Calling Stories of Faith podcast on lifeaudio.com or wherever you find your podcasts.